That thing just spoke to me. They just demanded our unconditional surrender.
Sci-Fi TV is full of hidden gems and epic failures, but some shows didn't just miss their mark. They were buried before they had a chance to shine. These are the long-forgotten sci-fi series from the 90s that were ahead of their time, or doomed from the start. Which ones will surprise you? Let me set the tone for Lexx with a quote: "The dead don't poo." Yep, you're in for something truly out there. This show was a bizarre mashup of dark humor, steampunk, and deadpan sci-fi, featuring a living spaceship and a misfit crew navigating two universes while dodging a tyrannical regime. Think of it as the weird, rebellious stepchild of the 90s that mixes deep philosophical themes with some of the most random pop culture references ever, from Hitchcock to General Hospital. A futuristic submarine exploring the last frontier, Earth's oceans. With Steven Spielberg as a producer and Roy Scheider, yes, from Jaws, as the captain, SeaQuest had all the ingredients for greatness. The first season was solid, but as with many shows, things went off the rails in later seasons. The writing got worse, the storylines became laughable, and even Scheider left, frustrated with the show's direction. SeaQuest could have been the next Star Trek, but instead, it sank. Brought to you by Peter Aykroyd, yes, that Aykroyd, this series is about a secret government agency investigating paranormal phenomena. Ghosts, alien abductions, and more. This show had it all. What's wild is that it was inspired by an actual scientific think tank, though the series takes plenty of creative liberties. Sure, it's full of factual errors, but the screenplays are clever enough to keep you hooked. Plus, the cast was top-notch, giving the show an unexpected level of sincerity. Frank Black could see into the minds of criminals, but Millennium was much more than a crime show. Chris Carter's follow-up to The X-Files was dark, apocalyptic, and dealt with the looming turn of the millennium. Lance Henriksen brought a brooding, intense performance as Frank, and while the show didn't quite live up to its potential, it's still one of the most underrated shows of the 90s. Sure, the final season didn't hit the mark, but rewatching the earlier episodes will remind you just how great this show could have been. A Babylon 5 spin-off with a premise that could have been amazing, a desperate search for a cure to a deadly alien plague. Crusade had potential, but it was doomed from the start. TNT never gave it a fair shot, moving it around the schedule so much that fans couldn't keep track. It didn't help that the special effects were a bit rough, even by 1998 standards. With solid acting and writing, this series deserved better than the quick cancellation it got. Sometimes, no matter how good the content, studio support really is everything. One of the most ambitious sci-fi series of the 90s, Space Above and Beyond tackled everything from interstellar war to personal demons. Think Battlestar Galactica meets Starship Troopers, but ahead of its time. The show dared to question the military-industrial complex and the true cost of war. Harsh, graphic, and unflinching, it wasn't your typical sci-fi series, and that's probably why it didn't get the love it deserved from Fox. Bruce Campbell is a Harvard-educated lawyer-turned-bounty hunter? Sign me up! The Adventures of Brisco County was a mix of Western and steampunk that was way ahead of its time. This show is pure bonkers, with over-the-top villains, absurd one-liners, and futuristic gadgets that had no business in the Wild West. Despite its weird charm and cult following, it never found a mainstream audience. But hey, sometimes the best shows are the ones that don't take themselves too seriously. A dime novel writer, pretending to be his fictional hero, gets pulled into real adventures. That's the premise of Legend, a clever mix of Western and steampunk that feels like the Wild Wild West on steroids. This show had everything going for it. Great writing, fantastic cast, and a premise full of potential. Starring Richard Dean Anderson, yes, MacGyver himself, and John Delancey, the chemistry between the two leads was off the charts. Sadly, UPN never gave the show a proper chance, and it was canceled before it could find its audience. Sliders had such a promising start. A young genius invents a device that opens portals to parallel universes, and each world they visit is a wild, unpredictable ride. The first few seasons? Great. But then everything went downhill fast. Bad decisions from the network, losing the best actor on the show, and replacing good writing with recycled movie plots. It's like the show slid into a bad parallel universe of its own, never to recover. If you're new to Sliders, stick to the first couple of seasons. They're worth it. After that, it's a mess. Time travel, government conspiracies, and a former CIA agent trying to stop disasters before they happen. 7 Days was a solid sci-fi show with a fun premise. Sure, it was a low-budget time cop knockoff, but it had its charm, and John LaPaglia brought a cool, collected energy to the lead role. It was short-lived, and the cast was pretty generic, but the time travel concept kept things interesting, even if the show didn't last as long as it should have. A man dies in a subway accident, only to have his brain transplanted into a genetically engineered superhuman body by a shady government project. Now and Again was a touching, funny, and surprisingly emotional show that got pulled way too soon. Eric Close nailed the role, bringing a mix of humor and heart as a man trying to reconnect with his family while being trapped in this surreal nightmare. The chemistry between him and Dennis Haysbert's cold, calculating Dr. Morris was fantastic, and this show deserved a proper ending. Aliens, government conspiracies, and the 1960s. Dark Skies had all the makings of a cult classic. The Hive, a parasitic alien race, is manipulating human history, and our heroes are caught in the middle of it all. The show was fresh, blending real historical events with its sci-fi plot. Unfortunately, it didn't last long, despite finding a dedicated fan base. It was often compared to The X-Files, which probably didn't help its chances. But for those who watched it, Dark Skies remains a hidden gem. Imagine Nostradamus meets The X-Files. That's First Wave in a nutshell. Cade Foster, a former thief, discovers an alien plot to conquer Earth and becomes humanity's only hope. Using Nostradamus's quatrains to guide him, Cade takes on the aliens with the help of a conspiracy theorist sidekick. It sounds ridiculous, and it kind of was, but First Wave had this weird emotional intensity that made it work. It's still a fun watch if you can handle the convoluted plots.